These are the posthumous memoirs of Madame Blavatsky, dictated from the spirit world upon the typewriter, independent of all human contact, to bring to light the things of truth and affirm the continuity of life and the eternal activity of the Soul Immortal. And we begin now with Chapter 1, Birth. I was born at Atkenaraslo, a province or vilayet in the south of Russia, in the year 1830. From my father's family, I became known to the world as the daughter of Colonel Peter Hahn, and my grandfather was General Alex Hahn von Rothstein Hahn from Mecklenburg, Germany, who settled in Russia. From my mother's family, the daughter of Helena Fadeev, Fadeef, and the granddaughter of Privy Councillor Andrew Fadeev, and of the Princess Helena Dolgorovsky, widow of Nicepor Blavatsky of the province of Erevan, Caucasus. I was called, within my earliest recollection, as a mortal being, Mademoiselle Hahn, or von Hahn, or de Hahn. My full name became Madame Helena Petrovna, in brackets, Hahn Blavatsky, and it will no doubt interest some to know that my family connections, that it may seem that in Russia and Europe I was not a person of ignoble descent or obliged to go about the world as a nomad for no other reason than to be abused by the spiritists, whose hatred I seem to have so unnecessarily incurred. The von Hahn family is well known in Germany and Russia. The Counts of Hahn belonged to the old Mecklenburg stock. My grandfather was a cousin of Countess Ida Hahn, the famous authoress, with whose writings England was well acquainted. Settling in Russia, he died in its service a full general. He was married to the Countess Probstin, Probstin, who after his death married Nicholas Vasychivlov, the brother of the famous prince of that name. My father left the military service with the rank of colonel long after arduous service, which was recognized by the government with its fitting decoration and titles. On my mother's side, I am the daughter of Princess Dolgoruki, with whose death the elder line of the family became extinct in Russia. Thus, my maternal ancestors belong to the oldest families of the empire, since they are the direct descendants of the Prince or Grand Duke Rurik, Rurik, the first ruler called to govern Russia. Several ladies of that family belonged to the imperial house, becoming Tsarinas by marriage for Princess Dolgoruka, in brackets, Maria Nikitsishna, had been married to my grandfather, to the grandfather of Peter the Great, the Tsar Michael Fedorovich, the first reigning Romanov, another, the Princess Catherine Alexeyevna, when he died suddenly before the ceremony. The strangest fatalities seem to always have persecuted my family in connection with England, but for the recital of these I will refer the reader to Incidents of My Life by A.P. Sinnett. So Incidents is in quotes here, so this is a book by Sinnett. The year of my birth was fatally and peculiarly ominous for Russia, as for all Europe. There was the visit of the cholera, which came as a horrible plague that killed off the inhabitants of nearly every town of the continent. The largest plantations failed in their crops, and the government was compelled to turn to its wealthy aristocrats to save the treasury from the depletions caused by various wars and events. In my family, about the moment of my birth, as I was so often told by my sister, occurred quite a number of deaths, and I seemed to come into the world amid coffins and desolation. And here I may be permitted to quote from the family records as the most authentic and reliable source of facts about this interesting period of my life, which, even now as a spirit, a dim skanda, skanda, or item of recollection. Quote, my father was in the army, yet in the night between July 30th and 31st, I came into the exterior world, incarnate, physically weak, and apparently but little of the mortal I afterward appeared. I was shocked by the effort, and a hurried baptism was resorted to lest I should die with the burden of original sin upon my soul. The ceremony of baptism in Orthodox Russia is attended with the ceremonial of lighted tapers and pairs of godmothers and godfathers, every one of the guests and actors being supplied with consecrated wax candles, which are elevated and lowered and being extinguished and relighted during the various ceremonials. Woe indeed if one should fall or suffer to ignite any substance during the service, for instantly the whole household would repair to the sick chamber, where they would watch the mother with frantic gaze, knowing full well that she or the child would emit the spirit before the day dawned. There is no doubt but that I obtained this initial horror of the whole structure of Orthodox religion from this and other domestic incidents, for I was tortured with a full measure of its inquisitional details throughout my childhood, and revolted constantly from the senseless superstitions which were the foundations of spiritual faith with all my family, and had been, with prenatal severity, back into the early centuries of the Christian calendars. During the baptismal rite, no one is allowed to sit, as they may in the Roman Catholic and Protestant faiths, but stand with uncovered heads, the Greek religion insisting upon this with vigor because of the idea that the dove of divine transubstantiation might become a nimbus or aureole around the head of some favorite deity, and thus become a miracle, giving that family to anticipate that the member would live under the protection of some favored ancestor or of the Holy Spirit itself. The room selected for the ceremony was not larger than the crowd of devotees selected to bear witness to this event. Behind the priest officiating in the center of the room with his assistants, in their golden robes and long hair, stood 3 pairs of sponsors, and the whole houseful of serfs, vassals, cutees, etc. The ceremony was nearing its close. The sponsors were just in the act of renouncing the evil one and his deeds, a renunciation emphasized in the Greek church by thrice spitting upon the invisible enemy, when a little relative, a child, toying with her lighted taper at the feet of the crowd, accidentally or in a moment of predestined forgetfulness, set fire to the long flowing robes of the priest, and resulting in a conflagration, immediate and severe, resulting in the burning of the old priest and several persons. Upon examination, my mother was found comfortable and unhurt, whereupon the bad omen was reflected upon me and the future Madame Blavatsky, on account of the superstitious beliefs of Orthodox Russia, was doomed from that day, in the eyes of the entire town, to an eventful life full of vicissitude and trouble. As a compensation for this unlucky event, I became the pet of my near relatives, and in my early girlhood became imperious bold and thoroughly self-reliant, and knew no other authority than that of my own whims and will. Yet, while still a child, before my frame was able to endure more than the details of youth, I was found at a party of children to come in at an auspicious time as the seventh guest, and this became known by the nursery, whose legends and lore gave it the name or untranslatable term of Sedmitchkas, Sedmitchkas, meaning one connected with the number 7. In the particular case, referring to my having been born on the 7th month of the year, on the night between the 30th and 31st of July, days so conspicuous in Russia in the traditions of popular beliefs with regard to witches, skolas, elementals, and the horde of creatures which inhabit the subliminal world and give their activity to the mental spheres of the ones who are their counterpart. This afterwards was referred to by my family as being the 7 spirits of rebellion, for it was pretty generally known that it was only necessary to forbid me doing a thing to have me at once do it, no matter what the consequences, and my nurses were changed often, and the governesses of other countries brought, but to no purpose. In the army and among the soldiers in the barracks, as I was often with relatives, I became hardened in temperament and a very Cossack at heart. It is to be wondered at that I did not go further in my bursts of passion than I did, for within my own nature I certainly knew my own feelings best, and what I required as a child, as well as in later years, and fully thought of the grave mistake of guardians who, knowing but little of the interior necessities of the young, or mistaking their outer lack of development as an indication of inner incipiency, think that their own often foolish ideas are better than one than their own. I wish to say here, for the benefit of the young, that the interior nature of children contains as much knowledge, and often a far greater superior kind, than the years of experience give their parents or guardians. Children are the substance of their ancestors, and contain all the wisdom, power, knowledge, and ideality, which is the family portion up to the hour of birth. It may be latent, but it is there, and so the outer frame is regarded as an indication of what the inner mind is. But no greater mistake could be made. And being born with the inner sight firmly developed, which was lacking in my parents and nurses, I instantly knew as a child that what they would never know. It was not likely then that I would submit to what I saw was inherently wrong, that I could tamely brook insults given to me as being a child when I was sensitive to their nature and knew as a spirit would the true natures of my surroundings in persons and things, understood the hypocrite at sight, and could foresee the penalties and rebukes of acts upon the part of my superiors in physical size merely, which made me the wilder and more ferocious as I realized the impossibility of having my opinion accepted. I was a good friend who could not make her wishes known. I was as a good friend who could not make her wishes known, and I saw ruin and calamity follow certain conduct when I could hardly articulate, and as a child cried often because of my lack of power and the prescience of interior vision. This element of my nature also gave me great trouble in all the years of my life, for I was brought into the troubles of my life mainly through incoherency, incipiency, and lacking clairvoyance of my associates. For I had been gifted with the power to have my ways accepted by those whom I trusted. I would have averted all my injuries, all my sorrows, and so it would seem to me now, and I know that one should be careful careful about the karma of their colleagues, the destiny which shrouds places and enfolds inanimate things. But of all this, later on, I will expatiate. There are few anecdotes of childhood days which have not already been given to the public in the incidents of my life, but my sister and others, and this I may relate, if for no other purpose than to refute the misstatements of my calumniators and cacophonous adversaries. When I was having my 7th birthday party, I was found in the company of a tall man of dark skin with a long dark beard. He was dressed in a most noticeable manner too, which was remarkable in our country, with its diversified costumes of the peasant class and the peculiar mixtures of the various servants' regalia. I was sharply questioned about him, and it never was discovered where he came from or vanished to, for I well remember that he told me the first thing which gave my nature its central overwhelming impulse, and the message which he imparted was of such a peculiar kind that even as a child it was impossible to extract from me any intelligible explanations about it. I was standing, talking, laughing with one of my young companion girls, whose father was also in the army, and we were discussing the matter of soldiers and their ways, for it was no uncommon thing for us to be repeatedly kissed by some higher officers, a matter which occasioned me the greatest repugnance even at that time. While talking to my friend, said, quote, "There is one of the Shukdas, Schukdas, end quote, meaning the class of men who followed the army around for the purpose of loaning to the officers money to advance to their families or to purchase trifles for tobacco. I, turning, saw that the one who has had so much influence on my life that is most important to the state that it began at this time was not, as it had been said by some critics, assimilated from Colonel Olcott or Mr. Felt or any others. This was my first meeting with the astral form of my master, the Tibetan adept, and it was from him that I learned of my mission in the world, its importance in cosmic events, and the methods by which I would be helped over the rough places and carried through great difficulties. Master did not stay long this time, but one of the first remarks which he made was that I should have a way to call him, or one of the Shabarans, at will when in distress, and that this may not seem to be astonishing in one so young. I may say that I had for days been telling my young companions about the visit of a man whom I was expecting from the sky, who would come in company with the Domovoi, Domovoy, in brackets, house goblin, and with the spirits of my ancestors give me a power over my enemies. I was also put on guard with reference to some of the actions and solicitude for me, and acquaintance was so evidently shown in many ways which I, with an unusual interior consciousness, interpreted and understood by these men and their chelas and shabarans, that it would be absurd to say that I assimilated their existence from anyone when I knew of them perfectly from the age of 7. I was under the tuition, protection, and guidance of these Essenes from the moment of birth, and as I know now, was incarnate by special sequence under planetary law. At this interview with my master, he gave me an amulet and some fine grass, which, when burned, gave me the power over the elementary life, and made the Ruskalka Domovois, gnomes, sylphs, and undines obey and protect me. It is related about me that I had a faculty for telling the most interesting fancies as a mere child, and as I grew onward and upward, my knowledge became more clear and was imbibed by friend, servant, family, and foe alike. I was a great reader later on, and such books as Captivate, the Immortal, the Grey Wolf, Ivan Zarevich, the wicked magician traveling in the air in a self-moving sieve, or those of Meletressa, the fair princess, shut up in a dragon until the Zarevich unlocks its prison doors with the golden key and liberates her, and especially the volume known as Solomon's Wisdom, filled with all anecdote of legend, myth, and that precious folklore with which my country is famous. I was thus, in the early days of extreme childhood, a seeker after the arcane knowledge which is the priceless boon of mankind, and would descend the ordinary life as the moon in its pale silvery radiance surpasses a common rushlight. A quite young child is not a morally responsible being. The organism has not attained a development in which the moral sense of the true entity can act through the brain of the physical and direct physical external acts. Sometimes a young child is marked out as in the process of becoming the efficient habitant of the entity or the soul that has commenced to function through its organism. And therefore, if you can conceive that there are in the world living men, adepts in the direction of forces on the higher planes of nature, with which physical science is only beginning to recognize, one might readily understand the occult relations that exist between them and a child in the process of growing up and gradually taking into itself a soul that such adepts are in relations with already. This is the beginning of a plan of unconscious metempsychosis, or soul transference, which is but little known and upon which I might discourse at length, but at present I will only resume the story of my life. I paid the greatest attention to the study of languages, and at times was somewhat proficient in all but the accent, and this continued to bother me greatly, and I was never wholly certain about the English. It seemed the most absurd tongue, for it made use of the same words to represent different thoughts, and in common with all foreigners, this continued to be a source of difficulty with me, but more noticeable at this time of my life than after, when travel and association removed some of it and made the balance less noticeable. Looking at my childhood from a psychological standpoint, I was in the midst of the unusual accompaniments of mediumship and its phenomena, and also under the visible observation of the occult authorities and occasional guardianship, to whose service my life became dedicated, and in whose company and ranks I am privileged to stand, embodied or as a spiritual intelligence. I visited the large cities of the continent with my father and often gave him much trouble by my impulsive conduct, but it arose from my imperious feeling of power, a fact I could not remove or abrogate even in my girlish days, and was due as much to the knowledge of a previous state of life, and being connected in my present existence with other individuals as a member of a powerful occult fraternity, which I tried to illustrate during every day of my life to all who would intelligently consider the subject. Whether I did this as being with spirits or incarnate men was in no sense a paradox or due to misleading tendencies, but because of personal bias of the one who is associated with. For bear in mind that I was among strangers and could only make my dress as I had the cloth. To those who believed in spirit, I was obliged to adapt myself to their mental inclinations and requirements, and I gave as I was permitted by the recipient. but I state that I was aware in my earliest years of the support and the power of the brothers in quotes, as at that time in my eventful life, and had no reason or cause to assimilate the idea from Alcott or anyone. Much of my brooding was due to the observable relations which I saw assumed between the sexes in matrimony, and I wondered how I could accommodate myself to it, as I heard it spoken of and discoursed upon. This gave me much concern, for reasons which I will, in the following pages, relate, and pass on from my childhood to my maturing years of the incarnate body. The soul was serenely awaiting in the silence of the night. And this concludes Chapter 1. Chapter 2 will be called Failure in Matrimony and Fellowship. Till soon.